alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to A Live After Reading. I'm your host, Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a new guest of the podcast, Val Collins. Oh, and I should say, this is episode 299 of the show, so this is the final episode of season 3, and that's pretty crazy if you ask me. I mean, this is the penultimate to 300 episodes. So I'm not going to make a reference to the Zack Snyder movie, but you can imagine I did. All right, let's go. Val, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Tim. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. I have been talking your ear off already, so I hope you're not too snowed and too...
Not at all. I like hearing about your family.
Well, yeah. So Val, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and the sort of things you write.
Okay, well, my name is Val Collins, and I've written a series called the Aoife Walsh Thriller series. Okay, so there are 5 books in the series, and the 5th book will be out in March next year.
Oh, nice. So you traditionally publish then? You got
No,
all these...
I'm not.
No, you're not. Okay. You just have a long lead time between books. Is what it sounds like, you know?
Because I'm taking too long to write them.
No. Oh, I shouldn't talk. I haven't written a book in like 6 months. I haven't finished a book in 6 months. I've written every day pretty much, but I haven't finished a book.
And how many do you normally produce in a year?
Like 4.
4 in a year? I can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just kind of... they're not that long lately, but 3 or 4 in a year. My goal is 10, but I'm not there yet.
I struggle to do 1.
You know, that's interesting, but how long are your books? I'm just curious. They 100,000
worders?
Not
very long. As psychological thrillers go, they're fairly short. I think they're less than 60,000 words.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, I love a mid-length book or a short little book like that because... honestly, like, even though I write epic fantasy, I'm like, I can't get around the actually reading an epic fantasy these days. They're too big. You know, like a Robert Jordan book. Never been a fan of those. Or and even Brandon Sanderson. Now, I'm like, why do you need all that many words? Give me a 60,000 word book. I don't need a 120,000 words.
But is that what's expected for that genre?
Well, I sometimes, but I mean, honestly, that's actually the thing I discovered recently was I'm not even really an epic fantasy writer at heart. What I am is a heroic fantasy writer. So I like Elric of Melniboné, Conan the Barbarian. Those are shorter books too. Those are like 40 to 60,000 words on average. And that's what I really should be. That's what I shoot for nowadays. It's not, but heroic fantasy isn't a genre that exists anymore. It's also called sword and sorcery. It's not a big deal now because epic fantasy kind of took over from it in the 90s. Kind of sad because that was where I was born in the 90s, and I'm like, wait, I missed my window.
Well, it'll come back. Everything comes back.
Oh, I'm sure it will. Yeah. So Val, you've got these thrillers.
Yeah, so mine are psychological thrillers. Okay.
So does that mean they are tinged with a little bit of horror or scariness?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I'm not into horror, I'm afraid. No, it just means they're character driven.
Ooh, okay. I can get behind that. I like my scary stuff too, but hey, characters are great.
No, they're character driven. So the main character in my books is a girl called Aoife Walsh. And Aoife is in her early 20s when the series starts, but she gets older with every book. So every book she's a year older. So she starts off in her mid-20s and she's married and she's heavily pregnant with her first child. And she's working as an office temp. And then one day she's her second day in this organization. She goes into the office in the morning and she finds her boss hanging from the ceiling.
Ooh.
So by the time she comes back from maternity leave, the police have investigated and they've decided that it was murder. And Eva sees this as her chance because Eva trained as a journalist and she always wanted to work in journalism, but she couldn't get into it. So she gave up and she started doing office work. But now she has a baby and she wants a job where she can control her schedule. And she thinks if she got into freelance journalism, that would be great. And she figures because she was the person to find this body, And she is now working with people who've known the victim for years. She figures she has a unique perspective on it, so that she'd be able to write a good story about the whole thing, and that would be the way she'd break into journalism. So that was how she gets into the whole thing about
Interesting. So you had kind of an origin story in that first book.
So I missed that.
That's kind of an origin story in that first book, then.
I'm not sure what that means.
An origin, like how superheroes have their origin stories and stuff.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
It's kind of like, how did we get here? Because a lot of like more mystery and stuff, like Sherlock Holmes, you don't have like, how did he become Sherlock Holmes?
Yeah.
I don't think Conan Doyle ever wrote a book like that.
No, I suppose not. But my idea was I wanted to write a book about an everyday person in extraordinary circumstances.
That's awesome.
And I wanted her to grow with every book. So she's growing as a person. Her life is changing. Her relationships are changing all the time.
Cool. It also kind of reminds me of, the Dresden Files. Obviously, just use the fantasy series as a reference. But because of the years, the books are about a year apart each, so that the character just keeps, advancing in age little by little.
In age, yeah. Well, that's the thing. Maybe someday she'll be a pensioner.
Yeah. Hopefully, here's to many more, right? And I guess there's something to the flow of time, when you're reading a series, having the books come out kind of in real time. I tried doing that with one of my series at one point, like where the books would be about as far apart as it would take me to write them. And I think that's kind of interesting because or it would take me to release them rather. But I've kind of given up on that because it's just too difficult.
Well, maybe in fantasy it is, but I think it's easier. It's actually easier in a thriller because you have the story that's going, because all of my books are standalone thrillers, so everyone has a separate problem that she's trying to solve. But the theme that runs through them all is Aoife and her life and how her life is changing. It gives a continuity that you wouldn't have otherwise.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I guess, that's one of the things I've been struggling with a lot lately, and I do talk about my struggles on this show a lot, so get ready, people. I've been struggling with actually finishing work, as I kind of alluded to earlier, and I guess it's just a matter of, I have a number of series out that aren't finished, and I have a number of characters in each series that I really like and would like to continue writing about, but then I always want to start something new as well, and there's this just squirrel mentality there, I can't stay focused.
Yeah, but you're doing 4 books in a year. How much can you expect of yourself?
Well, I didn't do 4 books this year. Let me be clear. It's only been one.
No, not this year, but you've done it for years. I think that's amazing. I can't even imagine how you could manage 4 books in 1 year. And if you don't finish them, so you can always go back and finish them another time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I just feel like I've been bouncing around like a pinball and not actually finishing a book, and that's not very effective,
I know. Well, I want to start another series too, but I actually haven't gotten around to it. So I have the opposite problem. I'm still writing a series and I really want to write another one.
Overly focused, maybe. Yeah.
Maybe.
But the nice thing about having a nascent series or something that you haven't quite started is that you're not kind of dedicated to it. You don't have to keep coming out with books in it to keep people interested because it's not even there yet. I don't know. Maybe that's just maybe I'm just trying. Well, because you don't even if you don't have a book out in a series, no one is waiting for you to write the sequel. Let me put it that way.
Well, no, that's very true. Yes, very true. Mm-hmm.
And so, like in my Demon Hunter books, I wrote the first 3 books, but I feel like that's a high fantasy, and I feel like that needs like 6 or 7 more books. And I'm like, when am I going to write those? I constantly start new stuff.
Yeah, but then you can even think that far apart, though, is great. That far ahead is great. 7 books in one series. I started off my series with the idea of writing 1 book. I never intended to write any more than that. I certainly wasn't thinking 7 books ahead.
Well, I don't actually plan much.
No,
I'm not a planner. I just have an idea because also I make my own book covers, and usually it's easier to make a series of book covers all at once. So that's why I kind of think ahead now a little more. Because I make the book covers and the titles for the series, and then I just write the books around the book covers, kind of. But right. They fit in pretty well, and I can't change the cover if I don't like the direction, the way it combines the book. But yeah.
Yeah. No, that's another thing that slows me down. I do nothing for myself.
Okay.
I don't do my own titles. I don't do my own blurbs. I have a lot of help.
Oh, that's interesting. So who do you get to do your blurbs, if I may ask?
Oh, well, I have a woman called Liz Saltis. Right.
Oh, yeah. I think I've heard of her, actually.
Have you heard of her? All right. So every book that I write, well, except for my first book, because I didn't know Liz when I did my first book, but every other book, she's come up with the title and she's come up with the blurbs for all of my books, apart from the first one. And then I have a guy called Patrick Knowles who's done all my covers.
Okay.
And then I have an editor as well. So I have I have Debs Hobbs Wyatt, who's my editor, and she has done all. Like I write my book, I send it to her, and she tells me how to fix it, basically.
Yeah, I've employed editors in the past, but I too rich for my blood. I can't afford it. So at least not most of the time I can't.
Yeah, no,
that's good.
Debs isn't expensive. I think for the job that she does, she's very good. And I have a copy. I have copy editor as well. But actually, Debs would nearly do that on her own. She does everything. All of it.
Comprehensive editing, excellent. So but I'm actually kind of curious because I've talked to some people in the past who didn't self-edit that much, who didn't go over the book themselves very often.
I do.
I was curious. I was going to ask, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, I go over it over and over again. I was being a bit flippant when I said, like, I do it and I give it to her. I've been writing it for ages. And I know I heard you say that you've started, or that you were dictating your books.
Yeah.
I don't do that, but what I discovered, which I think is brilliant, is I write my book, and then I might have written a chapter, and then I play it on Word, because I write it on Word. So I play it. I have it read.
Oh, you play the audio file. You play it as you have it read to you. Yeah.
I have it read to me, and I find that has made such a difference since I started doing that.
That's I absolutely agree with that. Because even when I dictate a book, I then have in the later draft, I actually always have it read to me by the computer as well.
Exactly. Because otherwise you just hear it in your head. You don't hear it the way somebody else hears it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And I got to say, if more writers listen to their work out loud, we'd have less clunky sentences to read, you know.
I feel like I'm back and rewriting my first two, because I think I was on my third before I found it.
Oh, no, that makes sense. I mean, I wrote like 20 books before I started listening to them out loud, and then I didn't publish that many. Most of those books will never be published because they're just not very good. Because I started writing when I was a teenager, right? So a lot of those books didn't make a lot of sense.
Well, I suppose nobody would write anything that, excuse me, that great when they're a teenager.
Well, not when you're 14 and autistic. I mean, that's tough. I mean, I'm sure there's a 14-year-old autistic out there who's going to be annoyed with me, because that's what I was when I started writing. But a 14-year-old autistic who's probably a lot better writer than I was, too. So let's be fair here. There's probably there are exceptions to everything. But it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, but after I said it, I remembered S.E. Hinton. She was 16 when she wrote her books, wasn't she?
Right. Yeah. The Outsiders. And she wrote a bunch of other books, too.
I adored that book when I first read it.
Oh, yeah, me too. I mean, that was a big book for me back when I was in like 6th grade.
Yeah. I can't remember when I came across it, but I remember I absolutely adored it.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's also surprising. It's a book that's, I can't believe she was so young, actually, because it's a very mature book in a lot of ways, even though it's about kids.
Yeah, it is.
And definitely, people should check that one out if they haven't already. I mean, obviously she's pretty famous. Yeah. And The Outsiders is her most famous book, but
she wrote a number of books, but I think that's her best.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. I tend to agree. I don't remember a ton of the other ones, but I did read a bunch of them in school.
Yeah, she wrote Rumblefish. I remember that in particular because I didn't like it. It was quite dark. Yeah. And it was about two guys who they weren't quite brothers, but they'd grown up together. And I think one of them went off the rails altogether. It wasn't what I was looking for at the time. I was looking for something lighter.
No, that makes sense. I mean, The Outsiders is a pretty dark book too in a lot of ways. It's got some dark things. There's a lot of death in that book. It's very Shakespearean in a lot of ways. Yeah,
well, there is death. Yes, I'd forgotten that.
Anyway, yeah. So actually, I'm just curious when you're writing thrillers, because we are talking about reading now. When you're writing thrillers, what sort of stuff do you read, or do you read a lot to keep up with other books and stuff?
I read thrillers. I know most people who write thrillers say they don't read them because it feels too much like work, but I read thrillers. I don't know why. It doesn't bother me at all. I read other things as well. I like historical fiction, and I like chick flick when it's funny. I don't like it when it's serious. But I love some of the earlier shopaholic books with Sophie Kinsella. I love some of her early books. They're really, really funny. But what else? At one stage, because I started reading when I was very young, at some stage I went through every single type of book you could. I started off reading romance when I was a teenager. Well, I started off reading as a kid, but when I got into my teens, I started reading romance. And then I went from that to, I think, autobiographies and crime and what else did I do? Classics at one stage. I mean, I went through everything looking for whatever it was that I really liked, and I settled on thrillers, and I never really left it. Take occasional, go off sideways into various things, but for the most part, I stick to thrillers.
Oh, that's awesome. I think that's really cool. I mean, you basically surveyed everything, and you're like, oh, now this is it. We're going to stop, and we're going to stay here.
Well, for the time being, maybe I'll move on to something else eventually.
Yeah, who knows? That's the beauty of life. You know, it's a stream. You're changing all the time. Even if you're going to read, and what you read is going to change too. That's just how it goes. Yeah.
Well, I suppose that's true. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Maybe it's just this backdrop that the listeners aren't going to be able to see behind you, but it makes me think of a little bit of a river, even though it's a pond. Whatever.
Oh, I love it. It makes me think of a Japanese house.
No, it definitely is. But anyway, that's too much. We're not recording the videos. So that's not going to be helpful.
It's just my background we're talking about.
Yes. Anyway. Yeah, so that's... When you write a thriller, you say... Is there a lot of peril? I mean, that's actually one thing I struggle with sometimes, because I really like my action scenes and my dark kind of fantasy twists and stuff like that. And... does your character end up in danger all that often in one of your books?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's a psychological thriller. Someone's always trying to kill her. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
In every book, somebody tries to kill her. And other people. But they're not graphic at all. I'm not into violence. Like, I just mention things. I don't go into them in detail.
Yeah, I don't... I think the toughest part for me... I mean, this is going to sound kind of weird maybe, but, I was watching that movie, No Country for Old Men. It's like a Western basically, but it came out I think in 2008. It's like a Western, but it's very dark and scary. It's a thriller, and it's set in the 80s, not the 1880s. But in this movie, at one point, this character, one of the characters have been in a shootout, and they both got wounded. And there's a scene where the character played by, geez, I forget his name. I remember the character's name, Anton Chigurh, right? The main villain of the movie. He's like the monster. Okay. Think of this. This is kind of like the scene from the Terminator where where Arnold Schwarzenegger removes his eye. It's like that because he's a robot. Because he's a robot, he removes his eye. So
I don't remember the eye though.
Yeah. So then he puts to put on sunglasses because he's just got this beaming red laser shoot instead of an eye. But in No Country for Old Men, it's just so visceral when he's treating this like shotgun to the knee that he'd taken, like these pellets, and I'm like I couldn't handle it. I'm saying all this by way of saying like I don't really like that much visceral stuff, that graphic stuff.
No,
and even reading it could make me pass out. I mean, there's been scenes that I've read, and then I'm like, wow, where am I? I'd wake up like a minute later because I'm like, the world started spinning.
Yeah, well, I mean, life is hard enough. You don't need to get made miserable through your books.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a lot of books out there that are like Robin Hobb comes to mind. I like Robin Hobb's work, but intensely dark and miserable fantasy stories.
Well, then I suppose it depends on the stage you're in your life. When I was a teenager, I went looking for dark stuff. Mm-hmm. I just wouldn't want it now.
Oh, I understand that too. I mean, yeah, people change, but and recently I've actually gotten more into the horror side of things. I mean, watching horror movies like Ringu, like It, not It. What is it? The Thing. That's a gross movie.
I don't watch horror, I have to say.
Okay, John Carpenter's The Thing is a very tight thriller though as well. Really? It's extremely gory in a few moments. It's an older movie. It's from like the 70s, I think. So it's got Kurt Russell and a bunch of I'm not sure. Do you know the premise of that movie? Because it's very interesting. I think it's got this great. It's a bottle movie, so it takes place all at an Antarctic exploration base.
All right.
But then they find this alien under the ice. Oh. Basically, it's a shapeshifter and it can replace people. Basically, that's the meat of the movie, and they can make copies. So you don't know who is a thing, who is one of these things, until it is there's a lot of psychology in it too, but it is much more. It's like the movie, that game Among Us. It's basically that.
So it's kind of like Battlestar Galactica, then, isn't it?
It's a little like that, yeah. But of course, there's only like 12 people on this base.
Oh, right.
So these guys, and it's in the movie, they're just being picked off one by one, but you don't even know who's being killed because they're just replaced by a monster that looks exactly like them. Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting premise.
And it's a really weird movie. But I think I just watched it over the summer, and I thought it's a classic of the genre anyway.
I must check it out.
Again, not for the faint of heart, though, because even though it's an older movie, the gore is actually extremely practical, and it's nasty. So,
really, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not all that. I mean, there's not all that much of it, but when it does happen, it's kind of disturbing. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Okay. Then definitely.
You might not want to do that. Yeah. But yeah. Anyway, I just can't extol that movie enough because, and mostly I'm saying this for the listeners. Obviously, everyone has different tastes. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Val, the general gist of this show, we talked a lot about reading already, but I'm kind of curious. What have you been reading lately? You got any recommendations for people?
Well, right at the moment, I'm reading Lee Child's Night School. I bought that. I bought that book about 2 years ago, and I still haven't gotten around to reading. So I decided this week I'm going to read it. And before that, I read The 13th Girl. I think it's Sarah Woodman, I think, wrote it, and that was a lot about people in I can't think of the word. Sorry, I just can't think of the word. What do you call it when people live together and do all sorts of weird things?
Oh, like partnership? I don't know.
Well, that's what I was trying to say. Yeah, it's about people who are in a cult, and this.
Oh, cults. Okay, I was way off.
Yeah, no, sorry, I couldn't think of the word. So, I really like that book. I mean, it is very suspenseful. I found that I was having trouble trying to put it down. I wanted to know what was going to happen next. What did I read before that? I read something about my father, not my father's son, or something. It was an autobiography about some English guy, and he was an actor. I can't remember his name.
No, that's fine. That's funny though. Some English guy.
No, it's dreadful. And I like to read. I can't think of names today. Philippa Gregory. I like to read Philippa Gregory occasionally because she does historical fiction, and I really like those books.
Okay. Well, Val, it's been great chatting with you. This is kind of the way out here. So tell people where they can find your books and where they can find you online.
Okay, so my website is valcollinsbooks.com, and I'm on almost all kinds of social media as Val Collins Books. And my books are all for sale on Amazon. My latest book, Where Loyalties Lie, is on sale everywhere. The rest of them are on Amazon.
All right,
and my new book will be out in March.
Excellent. So before I cough myself into a fit, I mean, I'm gonna have to say it's been good doing almost 300 episodes of the show. Actually, probably about 300 episodes at this point.
That sounds very impressive.
It's been 6 years almost at this point. So that's a long time to be doing a podcast, if you ask me. But hey,
but you did 300 episodes in 6 years, and I only did 5 books.
Hey, it's not that hard. I mean, obviously, I got better at it too. But yeah, that's one of the things about, and I would say this to every creator out there, is that you get better the more you do. So, it's just
there's hope for us yet.
Yes, exactly. So, thanks once again, Val Collins. It's been great having you.
Lovely talking to you, Tim. Thank you. Bye.
And bye-bye. And as for this podcast, you can find us at mentalcellularpublications.com, and you can find my books at timdiederwriter.com/books or on amazon.com. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week. It's episode 300, folks. So stay tuned. Bye-bye.
That tears it.